8 days ago, on June 22nd, 2026, Canada released a document that every American politician who has been calling Canada the 51st state should read before their next press conference, the Nuclear Energy Strategy for Canada. It is not a press release. It is a 160-page strategic plan, Canada's first ever national nuclear strategy, that outlines how Canada intends to build up to 10 new nuclear reactors over the next 15 years, sell Canadian-made reactors to countries across the democratic world, double its uranium exports, and use nuclear technology as what the strategy itself calls a central instrument of Canada's broader foreign policy interests. That last phrase is the one that matters most, not energy policy, foreign policy. Canada is explicitly declaring in a government-published national strategy document that exporting nuclear technology will establish multi-decade partnerships that advance Canada's geopolitical interests with allied nations. And it is doing so from a position of geopolitical dominance that makes the strategic statement as powerful as the infrastructure it is built on. Canada holds the world's third largest uranium resources. Canada's deposits are the highest grade on Earth, uranium concentrations reaching up to 20%, 100 times higher than the global average. While the United States produces only 8% of the uranium its own nuclear reactors need annually, requiring 25,355 tons of uranium every year to keep its lights on, Canada is sitting on 500 tons of reserves compared to America's 59,400. Canada has 10 times more uranium in the ground than the United States. Tonight, we explain what Canada's nuclear energy strategy actually contains, why it is the most consequential energy policy announcement Canada has made since the Trans Mountain expansion, how Canada's uranium reserves and nuclear technology position it to become the most strategically important energy partner the democratic world has, and why the United States' own dependence on Canadian uranium at a moment when Russia controls half of global uranium enrichment capacity makes the nuclear file the most significant under-discussed leverage point in the entire Canada-US trade relationship. Let us begin with what was announced. Energy Minister Tim Hodgson stood before cameras on June 22nd and described what he called a new civilian nuclear renaissance. The strategy he released is organized around 4 pillars. The first is domestic nuclear expansion, the construction of 2 large-scale nuclear reactors with at least one located outside Ontario to diversify Canada's nuclear geography beyond its traditional base in the province that operates most of Canada's existing reactors. Alongside the large reactors, the first small modular reactor in the G7 is already under construction at the Darlington Nuclear Generating Station in Clarington, Ontario, a project backed by $2 billion in federal funding and $1 billion from the Ontario provincial government, announced by Connie and Premier Ford in 2025. 3 more SMRs are planned for the same site. Alberta is developing a nuclear roadmap. Saskatchewan is pursuing both large and small reactor builds. New Brunswick is exploring expansion at Point Lepreau. The target is to build enough new nuclear capacity to contribute meaningfully to the government's commitment to double Canada's electricity grid by 2050, does a doubling that clean electricity demand from AI data centers, electric vehicles, industrial electrification, and population growth makes genuinely necessary rather than merely aspirational. The second pillar is uranium production and export, doubling Canada's uranium exports. Canada's existing uranium operations are led by Cameco Corporation, the world's largest publicly traded uranium company operating mines in northern Saskatchewan's Athabasca Basin, the most prolific uranium district on Earth. Cameco's McArthur River and Cigar Lake mines produce uranium at concentrations so high that they are unmatched anywhere in the world. The strategy's commitment to doubling exports is backed by a global uranium market that is tightening structurally as nuclear power demand surges. 75 new reactors are under construction globally, approximately 120 more are planned, and the International Atomic Energy Agency reported in late 2025 that 37 countries are developing nuclear power programs. Canada has the uranium. The world wants it. The strategy is about capturing the full value of that position, rather than simply shipping ore and watching others capture the processing and fuel fabrication margins. The third pillar, can-do reactor exports as a foreign policy instrument, is the one that deserves the most attention from anyone trying to understand Canada's strategic repositioning over the past 18 months. The CANDU reactor, developed by Atomic Energy of Canada Limited and commercialized over decades by a succession of Canadian nuclear engineering organizations, is a pressurized heavy water reactor whose design has specific commercial and strategic advantages. It can use unenriched natural uranium as fuel, unlike light water reactors that require enriched uranium, typically processed in Russia or the United States. It can be refueled while operating at full power, eliminating the costly and time-consuming shutdown refueling cycles that light water reactors require. And it produces a higher neutron flux that enables certain medical isotope production capabilities not available from other commercial reactor designs. Canada has exported CANDU reactors to South Korea, Romania, China, India, Pakistan, and Argentina. The strategy is explicit about what a new wave of CANDU exports would achieve. Reactor exports are not transactional. They establish multi-decade partnerships, creating durable geopolitical and commercial relationships that advance Canada's broader foreign policy interests. As Canada works to diversify its trading relationships and strengthen ties with middle powers, CANDU can be a central instrument of that strategy. That is language drafted by officials who have been watching Carney's European and Indo-Pacific diplomatic blitz and have concluded that nuclear technology is the domain where Canada can build the deepest and most durable relationships with the allied nations that now scrambling to build clean electricity capacity, energy independence, and strategic supply chain security simultaneously. Romania is a NATO ally that operates CANDU reactors and is building more backed by Canadian federal export financing. South Korea's nuclear industry, built partly on CANDU technology, is one of the world's most competitive. India, which is expanding its nuclear program aggressively, has existing CANDU relationships with Canada that could be deep under a more aggressive export strategy. The strategy's explicit declaration that CANDU exports advance foreign policy interests is Canada adopting openly and in a government document the same logic that France uses when selling Ariane rockets and Rafale fighters, the same logic that Russia has used for decades in building nuclear dependencies through Rosatom's international reactor program. Canada is entering the nuclear geopolitics game formally, on the record, with a national strategy. The fourth pillar is the nuclear fuel cycle, the processing, conversion, and enrichment of uranium from raw ore into reactor fuel. And it is where Canada's most significant strategic vulnerability and most significant opportunity simultaneously reside. Canada mines uranium. Canada operates CANDU reactors. But Canada does not currently enrich uranium, and enrichment is where the leverage lives. Russia controls approximately 50% of global uranium enrichment capacity. The United States provides enrichment services through its own facilities and through Urenco, a European-American joint venture. When Ontario Power Generation commits to building the BWRX 300 small modular reactor at Darlington, an American GE Hitachi design that uses enriched uranium fuel enriched at a facility in New Mexico, Canada is building a new nuclear dependency on American enrichment infrastructure. Even as the trade war has made the stability of that dependency politically questionable, the Globe and Mail reported in February of 2025 that until the past few months, the risks of the U.S. government weaponizing nuclear fuel against allies for political purposes seemed distant. Now, it is just one more aspect of Canada-U.S. relations that Trump has disrupted. Bob Walker, National Director of the Canadian Nuclear Workers' Council, said it directly. Developing a dependence on another country for our nuclear fuel has always been a concern, and recent events have proven those concerns are justified. Canada's nuclear energy strategy addresses this by committing to the development of domestic uranium conversion and fuel fabrication capacity, keeping more of the value chain on Canadian soil, and by explicitly diversifying the enrichment relationships that future Canadian reactors will depend on beyond the current concentration in the U.S. and Russia. The strategy does not commit to building Canadian enrichment capacity in this document, but it establishes the policy framework for pursuing it. And the RBC analysis of the nuclear opportunity, titled Atomic Advantage and published in March of 2026, described Canada's uranium and fuel security position as the foundational element of a potentially multi-billion-dollar nuclear exporting opportunity, as global nuclear investments need to nearly double to $120 billion annually by 2030. The political statement embedded in the strategy's timing is impossible to miss for anyone who has been following this series. Canada released its first ever nuclear strategy on June 22, 2026, 8 days before the July 1st CUSMA review deadline, while LeBlanc and Greer were in active trade negotiations, while the CSIS had publicly noted that Canadian tariffs could drastically undermine U.S. mineral security, while RBC had calculated that Canada's uranium reserves are 10 times larger than America's, and while the U.S. sources only 8% of its reactor uranium domestically. The United States has 94 operating commercial nuclear reactors. Those reactors provide approximately 18% of all American electricity generation. They require 25,355 tons of uranium per year. 8% of that comes from American mines. The rest, the overwhelming majority, comes from Canada, Kazakhstan, Australia, Uzbekistan, and Russia. In 2023, Canada accounted for 12% of uranium purchased by U.S. utilities. The Prohibiting Uranium Imports Act, signed by President Biden in May of 2024, banned uranium imports from Russia through 2040, accelerating the pressure on U.S. utilities to secure non-Russian supply. Canada, stable, democratic, geographically proximate, with the world's highest grade deposits and a long-established commercial relationship with U.S. utilities, is the most obvious and most competitive alternative to Russian supply in the American uranium market, and Canada just announced a national strategy to double its uranium exports. Hodgson told Politico explicitly that the export push would use nuclear as a geopolitical lever while maintaining strict safeguards against proliferation. The geopolitical lever is not a threat, it is an offer. Canada is offering to be the uranium supplier that America needs most in the moment that Russia's supply has been cut off, while simultaneously building can-do reactors for the allied nations that share Canada's values and want energy infrastructure without Russian dependency strings attached. The 51st state cannot be the country that controls your reactor fuel supply, builds your allied partners' nuclear infrastructure, and holds the largest high-grade uranium deposits in the Western Hemisphere. The nuclear energy strategy is Canada telling that story in 160 pages.